No, no worries.
Ah.
Right. Okay. Oh, and there's Jill just on cue. Perfect. Okay. So, hello and welcome everybody to Lockdown Still Lives Inspirational Books. And this is happening on the day of the England match against Denmark, you know, for historic purposes. So if anybody looks anxious or worried or we all of a sudden stop, then that's because of that. Yes, inspirational books. I think as we mentioned last time, to me personally, it's an incredible subject area. And even just thinking about it and today picking up some books and looking into them has been amazing. You know, it's kind of transported me back to a time when those books meant so much to me. And also what you find in them. I don't know whether anybody else does that, but I seem to store little treasures in them, photographs, little notes. It's been quite an emotional journey going through this. So, and I know some of you have felt the same because it feels like everybody's been quite finding it difficult to kind of whittle the selection down or deciding on one book. And that's why I'm incredibly excited actually to listen to Caroline, because you've really kind of focused on one book. And if you could please start and tell us all about Shan Riss and the White Saragossa Sea.
Right, okay. So I need to, you're going to put, could you put me into the middle, Marianne? And I'll show you, this is the book.
Yes. You are on my screen in the middle, but I'll spotlight video.
There we are. Hello, here it is. Obviously it's back to front view, but there are so many wonderful illustrative covers for this book because it's been out since 1979, I think it was. So it's had that many different versions. This was the one I happened to have upstairs. I've read it quite a few times, not for years. So when I realised I wanted to talk about it, I went upstairs to the loft and found it. And as Marianne said, I found all sorts of little bits of things in it, things that I'd underlined, things I'd stuck inside. Or I do that to books. Sorry, folks. I know some people don't like that, but I do. It was just, it seemed so completely relevant to a lot of things that are going on now. Having read it this time again, for this particularly, I really read it through completely different eyes, which is the most fantastic thing about really good writing or any wonderful art product, I think. Because you can keep rereading something or see something again, a film or a piece of art or whatever it happens to be, a piece of theatre or drama, and it's never the same. That to me is an unending piece of unique product, I suppose, art. For those of you who have no idea of it, how many of you do know this book or have heard of it or know what it's related to? Could you just say? Anybody?
Yes, me.
Who's me? Is that Michelle?
Yes.
Yes, Michelle. Okay. I think it may be because it came out in 79 and it has, although it's been done on television, it's had serializations, it's had various films. It hasn't had a film since 1996. I think it might have been a film in America. I haven't seen that one. But it was serialized on BBC One about in 1996, I think, which I saw, and I quite liked it. It was very restrained. But anyway, that's all bit as well. It is based on, it's sneakily portrayed, which is what I described it like in my explanation, as a prequel to Jane Eyre. So those of you who do know Jane Eyre may have a little bit of a heads up on part of the story, in a way. I don't think you actually desperately need to know Jane Eyre. You need to know a little bit about it and the myth and the classic story of the mad woman in the attic, who is the first Mrs. Rochester. Those of you who don't know anything about Jane Eyre, this might seem... Does everybody here at least know of Jane Eyre, the novel, that Charlotte Bronte?
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, I shouldn't assume these things because, that's not a definite. Okay, so If you know Jane Eyre, you know that it was written in way back by Charlotte Bronte. And when Jean Rhys studied it as a young girl, like many of us did in that era, and still do, I think, sometimes, especially in English literature to degrees and stuff, it is perceived as a work of genius of the 19th century, showing that women were not the passive, weak souls that perhaps they were usually portrayed to be or were expected to be. But of course, within that, because it was written in the 19th century and by Charlotte Bronte, and she had her own social constructs and things that she had to abide by, it was written through the eyes of that Victorian restraint. Now, when Jean Rhys read the book, and all her life she had been curious about how she wanted to react to this creature, Jane Eyre, but not just that, how she thought that the character of Bertha, the wife who had been brought back from the West Indies and incarcerated up in the attic, as she was apparently insane, she thought she'd been very badly treated. She was much more curious about that character, or she wanted to delve into it. And that is because I feel that she was born in the West Indies, Jean Rhys herself. Those who don't know about her, she was born in way back. She was, oh goodness, when was she born? She was 79 when she died, and she died in 77 when she died, and she died in 77. She died in 79. So she was quite an elderly lady when she wrote this book, an elderly woman, because she had thought about it all her life. It had been frustrating to her. She was born in the West Indies and lived in an estate from her mother's Creole estate. This was in Dominique. And so for the first 16 years of her life, Jean Rhys was brought up in one of those hot, sultry, the classic sort of tropes that we've seen in many, many films from our Western eyes, especially our white Western eyes. She was brought up in one of these estates, and she grew up as a Creole child. Her father was a Welsh doctor, and hence her name Rhys, which is interesting. And but her mother was a Creole estate from a very old, a descendant from the Creoles of this particular part of Dominique. For those of you who are not quite sure what Creole is, I had to be very clear about what I understood it to be and what I thought it had been in the past. A Creole is a white West Indian who were descendants from the original slave owners. Of course, because the vast majority of the states in the West Indies were from our colonial past. So the story that Jean Rhys was interested in, as I said, was who was the woman in the attic, and why has she been reduced to this cipher, this crazy mad creature that we all just use now as a sort of cliche, as the mad woman in the attic. And she said, I wanted to say, she didn't want to just write about all those crazy mad Creole heiresses, because indeed, apparently there were many of them in literature, and in fact, many of them had been left to, if you like, decay away in these decadent, rotting estates where everything had shifted when the Emancipation of Slavery Act had happened in the West Indies from the 1830s onwards. And many of them were left to their own resources. This is just the facts I'm saying here, not my emotional response to that, in that these slaves no longer belonged to them, no longer were their servants, and these families were left to be despised by the slaves, and also neither were they looked at as legitimate part of British society, because they were indigenously born as West Indians, even though they were white. Within that, of course, there's just a vast multitude of cross-referencing and cross-marriage and liaisons and relationships, etc., etc. So the whole of the West Indies was a massively complex place. Apart from looking at reading this book, which I've always loved. I remember recently, Ed and I watched in lockdown Black Sails, which is a bit of a sort of potboiler, how to describe it, box set, but it's pirate based. But actually, once you get past the first bit of body stripping, explore, they have to sort of tell you all about it with all the silly characters. Once it settles down, it gives you the most incredible history of the West Indies and how all the different factions were fighting and who was taking over who and who did what and how people were and all the complex relationships within with the very many different sort of groups. It is a really interesting little box set, that one. That's just an aside, but I thought it was worth it because that's more of a popular sort of view of stuff. But it really does give you some great history. So Jean Rees said, "I never disappoint your audience." Now she was I think I like this book because it's so full of wonderful stories and the book has 3 different parts. The first section is written by the child, who is in fact called Antoinette Cosby, who in fact is Bertha, called Bertha by Rochester when he brings her back to England, or drags her back to England, screaming basically. She didn't want to come. So what the first section is written from her point of view as a child growing up until she finally has this arranged marriage by her completely exploitative stepfather with this man called, he's never named in the book, in the Wide Sargasso Sea. You have to sort of, you get links and connections to Jane Eyre with the name of Mason and the different families that get mentioned, but in fact the man she marries is never mentioned, so one assumes it is Edward Rochester, but his name is never said. Anyway, she said, I really, really desperately want to talk about this particular Creole woman, not any particular, and that's why I like it, because I think it's extremely authentic and specific, detailed psychoanalysis, if you like, of a child's development and how they grow up and what happens to them and what's happened in their past and how that affects their life and their relationship. I don't think this book could have been written at any time before psychoanalysis, for example. For example, when Charlotte Bronte wrote Jane Eyre, she doesn't really go into, she factually shows how Jane Eyre is formed, but she hasn't got the wherewithal to go further outside her own country to think of what happened to this person who was brought across from the West Indies, who was freezing cold, didn't know where she was, completely disorientated and dragged back for all sorts of reasons. So what she does is, Jean Rees herself as a woman was fascinating. When she was 60, she came back and lived the First World War in England, and then in her youth she became she was quite a bohemian young girl, and she joined chorus. She was a chorus girl, she was a mannequin, she was an artist model, so she joined the sort of bohemian demi-monde sort of world of London. She quite early she married her first husband. She had 3 husbands. She never had a relationship which was a totally never had a relationship which made her feel peaceful and calm. She was always railing against things, because really, I think she, again, even in her time, remember it was the 1920s, 30s, it would have been unusual for a woman to have lived with a man without getting married to him. So each time she married, I think from what I've read about her much more now, she probably felt she'd given away some of herself, her liberty and her sense of herself. Anyway, if you think about Jane Eyre and all the things that happened to the Jane Eyre, who was brutalised in the school when she was a child and dismissed by her aunt and told to live on her own, all the things that happened, that what created Jane Eyre. Jane Eyre was was shown as a repressed person who had to keep buttoned up because of the social restraints, social conditions of her life in Victorian society. But inside, she was this raging person who wanted to break out and stand up for herself all the time. And sometimes she did, and sometimes she didn't. Now, once I went to see a fantastic version of Jane Eyre by a theatre company called Shared Experience. And this was the first time I'd ever really wondered myself about who was, in fact, this crazy mad woman in the attic. Because how they showed it on the theatre was as each scenario in the story came up. It was a physical theatre production. And as each story came up, each development of Jane's story came up, there were two Jane Eyres. There were two actors on stage echoing each other. So there'd be Jane Eyre going through one of her traumas, but behind her there was another girl, and Jane Eyre was, buttoned up with her little tight dress and her whatever age she went to be, from childhood to youth to young woman, and the woman behind her, who echoed everything she did, had a red dress, her hair was down, and she would show the inside emotion that Jane couldn't show. Does everybody follow that?
Yep.
Yeah. So it's hard to explain it, if you see it. But when you see it, it was extraordinary at first. You thought, what's that girl behind her for, doing that? And gradually, as they grew up, the actor changed, like they changed from a young actor to an old actor. And as the story became more and more, as Jane became more and more oppressed and had to get herself even more sort of buttoned up. I remember her the particular costume this particular actress had on. She had her costume right up to her neck, and she could hardly, move the corsets and the restraint. But the girl became more and more loose, if you like. And gradually, throughout the whole of the play, this particular production, the girl would move up the set, and there was a sort of staircase up to a sort of framework. And especially as she became a young woman, and obviously her emotions became wider and deeper and more emotional, and she had sexual emotions and everything, the girl on the attic would be, responding in an incredible way while she was repressed. It was absolutely wonderful to show how you could be two people at once in a restrained society. And that's when I started to really think, oh God, what an incredible way to show Bertha. And of course, in the end, this red figure in the attic became Bertha in the play, and Jane came up and met her, of course, and they had this amazing tussle, and it was all very psychological and fantastic, but it was so easy to follow at the time. It was absolutely amazing production. Shared Experience, they're called. They're still doing stuff. Anyway, that started me off in thinking about this. So I read it again at that point, and then I realised that it was the truth you get in Jane Eyre is her truth, and you get some of it written by other people. But in the Wise Agatha Sea, you get the first part is Antoinette Cosby herself, who has been brought up in this estate, very much like Jean Rhys was, and you see her going through this very distracted and languid childhood, where she's left to her own resources. Her mother is very unhappy, married to this totally insensitive, horrendous guy, and he doesn't have any sense of the fact that she's Creole, and she has to try and be, who is she? What is her identity? And he doesn't realise that the slaves and the servants around the estate are becoming very, very antagonistic, and he doesn't care, so he doesn't notice what his wife and the child are going through. And so the child is left to her own resources and doesn't quite know who is she, what is my identity, which of course is why the thing at the moment is so interesting. This book is so interesting because it tells you all the complex scenarios of what colonialism has done to all of us, including everybody that comes into contact with it. And I think it was one of the first time when I read it again, as an older woman, apart from being very young when I first read it, I realised that the context of someone's story is absolutely important. So, and for me as a theatre person as well, I know that's what I always have to, if I'm looking at characters or people, I have to understand what is their context, where have they come from, how did they get there, what do people say about them, what do they say about themselves, how do they perceive themselves, and what happened to them to get them to this place, and then to this place, and then to this place. And these are the sort of detailed sort of questions that you ask yourselves. Jean Rhys wrote things like, apparently when she was young, she had many West Indian friends all over Europe. She obviously gravitated to all sorts of interesting, fascinating different groups. And at one point she wrote on her wall, "Great is the truth and it shall prevail." But of course it always depends on whose truths and who are the people that you believe. I mean, it's like detective stories, isn't it? Everybody's got their own truth of what is truth.
Art is not therapy.
No, who's this? Sarah? I can't see. Who was that?
Sorry. No, I must have unmuted. Sorry, I was talking to somebody in the room. Apologies.
Okay, that's all right. I thought someone said art is not therapy. Yeah. Did someone say that? Wasn't to me though. Okay. Okay.
Sorry, I was saying that to my friend who says sorry.
It's all right. Okay. Basically, I suppose what you can say is, here's a picture of her, by the way. I wanted to show her. This is the National Portrait Gallery. It was when she was around a couple of years before she died. I'd like to go and see that when I get back to the National Portrait Gallery and have a really good look at that. It looks like a lovely photograph. She was. I'll go back for when she wrote Jean Rhys, she always wrote about women who were the underdog, but not the underdog in that they were weak, but they knew that they had to fight for everything. They were often mistreated or rootless, and she wrote in the 1930s about young women who weren't just made to get married and then have children, women who wanted to do other things, which was really ahead of her time. So after about the 1930s, when she wrote some of her small short novels, and there's one lovely one called Voyage in the Dark, about a 19-year-old Creole girl who comes across and find a lot of her work is sort of autobiographical, really, and she sort of slides into sort of the demi sort of dark areas in London and doesn't know what she's doing with herself, but she refuses to sort of bow down to what people expect of her. And there's a lot of really wonderful stories most of her stories are about women in these situations who are trying to find something for themselves, but they are up against it in the patriarchal society that they're in. And of course, in the 1930s, that was quite unusual. Most people were writing about very different things to that. And her books weren't very well thought of at the time. And she disappeared. So for 30 years, Jean Rhys disappeared really off the face of the earth. She did all sorts of strange things, went all around Europe, did all sorts, married again, had two children, none of whom I think were particularly happy with her or vice versa. And she had depressions and all sorts. And in 1966, it was thought she was dead. And many in the publishing world, even though they'd found some of these old novels, they thought, well, what's happened to her? And she was living in sort of almost as a hermit in Cornwall and Devon. And she was coaxed to come out again to show what she'd written. And she'd written this book, The Wild Sargasso Sea. And all her heroines and all her books, if you like, all the women that she'd focused on her books, were sort of pushed into this particular final gasp. She'd written it in her 60s, and she kept it for about 9 years, constantly faffing around with it and changing it. And she allowed it to be published when she was 76, when her third husband, had finally died. So I just think, I'm sort of wafting now, I think it's also a book about the senses, which is very important to me, because that's how I That's how I've always loved. I love books that take me in somewhere, immerse me somewhere. The senses, sight, smell, hearing, touch, taste, because it's set in an amazingly evocative place, which is the many of the different islands, and Dominique being the main one. It's a real heady brew. And, when I first read it, I was probably really young, 16, 17, having my first relationships, my first sexual experiences myself. And it's quite sensual in that way. It takes you into the passions of things, which as a very young woman I thought was really beautiful, because it was written from the woman's point of view. Quite often, I was reading Lawrence and stuff, which at the time, which had a very different view of things. Can I just read you the opening paragraph or two of the book to see what you think? Is that all right?
Yep.
Yeah.
You're in charge.
Okay. Sorry, I just wanted to say, feel like. Okay. How long I've been going on? That's all. Marianne's got to tell me to shut up. Right. Okay. This is the start of it. This is the start with the child Antoinette Cossey, who is Bertha in the attic. In the end, in Jane Eyre, we think it says. It's never actually stated. The second part is written by Rochester himself, and he gives his version of how he was duped into marrying this imbalanced family who were dysfunctional, and they kept all the secrets from him. Secrets are a big issue in the whole of the book. There's lots of things about secrets and hidden histories, which of course is what colonialism is all about. There are some wonderful examples of roads that people say, you don't go down that road, there's nothing down there. And people say, well, why is that? And they say, oh, it's a village. What's it called? Massacre, they say. This is an example. And then they say things like, oh, was there something terrible happened there? Nobody knows. Nobody talks about it. So there's so much oppression and stuff in it. Well, let me start anyway, if you don't mind. I won't go on too long. This is Annette Cosley as a young child. They say when trouble comes, close ranks. And so the white people did, but we were not in their ranks. The Jamaican ladies had never approved of my mother, because she pretty like pretty self, Christophine said. She was my father's second wife, far too young for him, they thought, and worse still, a Martinique girl. When I asked her why Sophie came to see us, she told me that the road from Spanish Town to Calubria Estate, where we lived, was very bad, and that road repairing was now a thing of the past. My father, visitors, horses, feeling safe in bed, all belonged to the past. Another day, I heard her talking to Mr. Luttrell, our neighbour, and her only friend. Of course, they had their own misfortunes, still waiting for this compensation the English promised when the Emancipation Act was passed. Some will wait for a long time. How could she know that Mr. Luttrell would be the first who grew tired of waiting? One calm evening, he shot his dog, swam out to sea, and was gone for always. No agent came from England to look after his property. Nelson's Rest, it was called, and strangers from Spanish Town rode up to gossip and discuss the tragedy. Live at Nelson's Rest? Not for love or money, an unlucky place. Mr. Luttrell's house was left empty, shutters banging in the wind. Soon the black people said it was haunted. They wouldn't go near it, and no one came near us. So you already have a sense of being other in a place that you should completely identify with. So I just think it's just so complex, and it's literally like the tendrils of the way it describes some of the wild country, the most beautiful wild country. Let me see what else I wanted to say about it. Many of her characters, especially the women, are suffering from an inner loneliness because they're misunderstood or they're not mistreated. And there's a lovely quote here. She says, "Loneliness is all very well, but it needs fine weather." I think I love that quote. There's things like the five senses. sort of lines like, orchids flourished out of reach for some reason, not to be touched. The scent was sweet and strong. I never went near it. Because there's a sense of decadence and sort of rotting beneath everything, which of course is actually what many of these islands still have, that are sort of festering somewhere underneath, and the festering things are coming out in our society now, I think. So I just couldn't, when I looked at it again after quite a few years I hadn't read it, I thought, my God, there's just so much coming home to roost here with all the stuff that we're getting in the back histories. It's a real heavy brew, really. I think that's about it. There's just one last thing maybe here. Oh yes, that's it. The last part of the book is written by Grace Poole, who is in Jane Eyre. So it's definitely linked to Jane Eyre there. You finally get that. And she's talking to who is now called Bertha by Rochester. He's almost taken her name and almost killed her for the real person she was, because she was called Antoinette Crossley. But Bertha is a name that other people have called her through various other Englishness being pushed onto her. Grace Poole's talking about, and so he sets her in the attic. So she's actually speaking from Thornfield Hall in the attic, and she's talking, and then Bertha takes over, Antoinette takes over, and she starts talking about where is she, why is she here, how did she get here, or who are all the people downstairs. She talks a lot about fire. She talks a lot about I'm cold. So there's so much symbolism in it that are pretty obvious. But there are some absolutely wonderful, wonderful links to her sense of herself and her mindset. And is it surprising that women were called hysterical or mad, in these scenarios where they were so repressed and so taken over? And of course, when you married, you were literally a possession of your husband. So all this business of owning things, it isn't just the personal, it's the political, it's the personal too. And she realizes that once she's married him, literally every single thing is his. He can do whatever he likes with her money and her estate, which he does. When he hears the stories that have been gossiped about her and her family all these years on the estate, he immediately turns against her and blames her for it, or refuses to listen to her stories. He won't listen, he won't allow her to her own sort of story. And as Jean Rhys said, when I read Jane Eyre, she said, there is another story. That is the English one. It is that particular Creole I wanted to write about, not all the other mad Creoles. And so she wrote about identity and women and their sense of being good or passive or trying to be, and how they railed against that. And all her female characters have that element in her. And I think that was Jean Rhys herself, from what I've read. She never quite found peace and calm in her life. She railed against a lot of the things, and it may well have been their own start that she had herself, and the sort of rootless wandering she did in Europe. I mean, it sounds all wonderful, doesn't it? It sounds romantic that you're living the artist's bohemian life, but she was poverty stricken and probably did all sorts of things to look after these feckless men that she was with. It's easy to there are so many different truths, and
Caroline,
story's gone forever. So anyway, there we go. That's it.
Caroline.
Thank you, Marianne.
That's great, thank you. Caroline, what really fascinates me, it's unbelievable, it's so beautiful, and you've really kind of opened up genres to me. I read it, but I did not know all of the things that you just shared with us. So thank you so much. But one thing that really fascinates me, and I really need to know now, is why this book for you? Why?
Why?
What is it? What is it that absolutely, there seems, I know you've kind of talked, what is the one thing that really makes this book stand out so much to you, that it stayed with you, that you've revisited it?
I think it was the first book I read when I was young, and I am still like it now, where I realised that I could, if you like, stand up to a man. Mm-hmm. Now that sounds a very, very basic thing, But it was a book where I thought, this is how I feel. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. I am not going to be told, well, you know, you talk too much or stop doing that, or I will be me. And I was already in, I have been with Ed a long time, but I was in another relationship at the time. I only had a few relatively long ones before I met Ed, so I was only 21 and a half when I met him. But, you know, the point is, I was really finding out who I was as a woman, and it really hit home to me. I know why Jane Eyre frustrated me, because she didn't often manage to, you know, say it. And I wanted to be that woman behind. And when I saw that show, that theatre experience where they had the two women together fighting, I thought, I can probably be both, but I know I'm more that person behind. And I loved it for that. I just literally reached out to it for that, you know, that's why. And it's never gone away, that feeling about this book.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think that's exactly what books do, don't they? They kind of reveal a side to us and our guides to us, and kind of something that maybe our parents never told us, our friends didn't tell us. We find those voices there and feel
well,
so
it happened it's very weak. It happened where I stood up for myself in a way that was quite hard, because I was staying with my brother-in-law, my sister. You know, I've known him all my life, his brother-in-law. Obviously, she's been together with her husband a long time too. And he said to me in a slightly disparaging way, because it was quite a long week with him. I like him, but you know, it's hard, long time. And he said, "Oh, you're so intense, Caroline." I thought, yeah, but is it because I've got opinions? You know, I talk a lot about things. And I thought it was quite a put down the way he said it. And so I said, "What do you mean by intense, Rich? Come on, you know." And he said, "Well, you know, you always got so much to say about everything." And I thought, well, yes, I wouldn't suit you as a partner, but that doesn't mean to say that, you know, because my sister isn't like me. She's very, very different, you know. And it was just very interesting that I still had to come back to him, because I thought, don't say that to me in a slightly patronising way. Do you know? Really annoyed me.
Great to hear that this book, you know, has given you kind of this guidance and the strength and the support in a way. That's amazing. Thank you.
I have to say something here, Caroline, because I've not read that book specifically because my daughter told me to read it when she was at a certain stage in her life, and I did not want to see Jane Eyre ruined for me, because believe it or not, I did not see Jane Eyre as this. I saw her as somebody who was very strong and very able to say, you know, "I'm sorry, you know, I can't do this. That's wrong what you're doing up there."
Yes,
with your wife.
Yeah,
and she does the same thing again then later with the man who wants to marry her, which would have been very convenient, and take her to be a missionary. And all the way through, she's fighting this battle to be, and the only time, and I had a problem with Rochester from the very beginning of the book, really, because everybody does, because he's such an unpleasant man, really, isn't he?
He is, yeah.
And when he finally gets to the bit where he's blind, I thought, the score's even. Score's even now, because and I was so scared that if I read this book, it would ruin the Gothic, and I must admit, it's like Rebecca, same thing, lousy man, you know, you know, the same kind of thing. But it was so interesting to hear you talk about it, because I feel I need to read it, because my take, obviously, long time after it was written, that Charlotte Bronte could not have, was that poor Bertha was schizophrenic or bipolar. And that nobody helped her, nobody understood her, and that she was just given a carer who basically kept her chained up, which is not that far away from what has happened until quite recent times, when people are or drugged into, you know, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, drugged into, you know, normality, whatever that is. But schizophrenia is a cruel, cruel disease. And I did feel all those things. But when Chloe talked to me, she didn't tell me it the way you just told me about the wives together. She very much told me, you know, oh, I think she was feeling, and she actually acted in at school with a girl playing Rochester. I'll never forget that. I think the way she portrayed it to me didn't have the nuances which you've just very much tempted me with, the flavours, the taste of her life before, and from everybody's point of view, because there's no question Jane Eyre is from Jane Eyre's point of view.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, I mean, that you could even say that, considering that it is ultimately about Bertha, about Antoinette, actually Jean Rhys is relatively easy, not easy on Rochester, but she tries to get into the psychoanalysis of the background that he came from. He also came from an exploitative, ex-slave family, which actually he had not actually personally done himself, because it was 100 years before where his grandparents and ancestors were doing it. But he was duped to some extent. But at the same time, of course, he does, of course, get the best out of it by, trying to break her, because he won't allow her opinions. He won't allow her to explain how all the scenario has made her. I mean, the poor girl, she went... If you read the story, she's gone through so much tragedy, so much awful stuff with losing. There's just too much to tell you in the plot. But and yet she's still supposed to be, this perfect, languid, well-behaved woman. And I think there is so nuanced, and I haven't really gone into the depths of the colonial sort of past of it all, because it's almost like it's subsumed into the whole story. You don't really, to take it out of it, it's all part of it. You really immerse yourself in it, or you go, oh my God, that's what it must have been like then for all these mixed communities, all trying to fight for some sense of who they were, It's a right melting pot. It's amazing. That's only because that's now with the hindsight, I'm older and more experienced to understand about it all. And it's what's happening now. We're all, threshing around, aren't we, trying to find out, with all the things that are happening recently, white privilege and all that. I really started to read it with different eyes this time. It was fascinating. Anyway, there you
go. Great, thank you. And you just touched upon one, important aspect of books is that portal that's open to us to actually enter a completely different world, a completely different life, and just by reading and spending, a few hours,
Yes, I'm listening.
So thank you so much. Yes, and I'm really curious to hear more stories like this, or more journeys around books. So
I've just burnt the rice, just thought I'd tell you. There we go. I smelled something and I thought, what's that?
No.
It's an interesting time, though, that, because when you read the Bronte books, in many ways they were similar. There were these girls that being made to behave in a certain way, and there was all this repression underneath. And a lot of those Edwardian books, that I grew up on, because they belonged to my aunts and uncles, and I sort of read them because they were around the house. Even ones like The Secret Garden. You got a child, that's very repressed.
Yeah.
It's just so interesting, because we're understanding better now why.
Yeah.
It's interesting, isn't it? Right, let's move on and see what other books we can discover here. Is there anybody who would like to kind of volunteer and go next? Lisa, maybe, or Sarah, or David? Yes, David. Okay, excellent. Let's go with David.
Well, this kind of follows on from Caroline's talk, because it's about a different world, as you were saying, Marianne. It's an insight into a whole different continent. Anyway, I'll just bring up the presentation I've done. So where do I share screen? Share. Can everybody see that now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm not sure whether I would call this exactly inspirational, but it's certainly a book I really, really admire. The book is entitled Memory of Fire by Eduardo Galeano. Galliano, I should say. I'm saying it in Spanish, but he's an Italian extract, but he's a Uruguayan writer. It's a history of Latin America from pre-Columbian days to the present time, or the present time when he finished the book. It's a very, very thick book. In actual fact, it's a compendium of 3 volumes, each volume written and published separately between 1982 and 1986. These were Volume 1, Genesis, Volume 2, Faces and Masks, Volume 3, Century of the Wind. Although I've called it a history book, it's not quite the usual sort of history book. As Galeano says in his preface to the book, or to the work, I am not an historian, I'm a writer who would like to contribute to the kidnapped memory of all America, but above all of Latin America, that despised and beloved land. Galeano sets about doing this by giving us a series of separate short texts, initially undated and based around pre-Columbian myths and folk legends, and then later on, from the start of what he calls the Old New World, i.e. 1492, onwards, one text or more for each of the years that follow right up to the present day. Here's an example. It's a very short piece, this one, and many of the pieces for each year are quite longer than this. But this one is how he sums up the death of the great liberator, Simon Bolivar. And this is what the governor has to say, who's obviously a Spaniard, who Bolivar has been fighting against. Bolivar, genius of evil, torch of anarchy, oppressor of his country, has ceased to exist. Galeano composes each text from many sources. There are 475 listed in the index, from all parts of the continent and beyond. The sheer breadth is quite astonishing. The text often use the testimony of eyewitnesses, or else the work of scholars and writers, particularly Latin American, who research histories of their own particular regions. Galeano also uses extracts from novels, plays, poems, songs, and even draws on ephemera such as classified ads and graffiti. This is one of his, again, it's a short one. I didn't want to sort of read too much out, you know. This is inscriptions on a rock in the Atacama Desert about 1867. Antonia, for you I die, you know who. The Chanacilio judge is stealing. Pay me my 3 ounces, Ramon. The administrator is a lout. TP says he isn't a mulatto. What's, oh yeah. Yes, Galeano skillfully weaves these different sources into an ongoing history, one year at a time. And yet, as Galeano freely admits, I was a wretched history student. History classes were like visits to the waxworks or the region of the dead. The past was lifeless and dumb. What's fascinating for me is that Galeano manages to bring the past to life so vividly. Although there is an historic narrative and a chronology, you nevertheless tend to feel that this is more than just history. Galeano is delving into the soul of a continent. I think I would best describe his work as a sort of mosaic of history, each small part coming together to create a whole, which he produces with the skill of his own written work. I should perhaps mention that Galeano wrote another book called The Open Veins of Latin America, several years before writing Memory of Fire. I don't know if anyone's read this book, but it was a very popular book when I was younger, because it sort of was a very savage indictment of the development of Latin America. A grim history of slavery, colonization, economic exploitation, imperialism, neocolonialism, dictatorships, and the destruction of natural environments. A catalogue of man's greed and stupidity. The book became a standard reference for Latin studies in many universities. I remember I found it a deeply depressing work when I read it. It seemed like one dreadful iniquity piled on another, almost to a point of outrage. Galeano often said that many of his fellow Latin Americans had a kind of collective amnesia about the past. I suspect that his motivation for writing The Open Veins of Latin America can probably be summed up with the old adage, if we do not learn from the mistakes of history, we are doomed to repeat them. And there's Hugo Chavez meeting Barack Obama for the first time, and he did give him a gift of Galeano's copy of Open Veins of Latin America. Oh. Actually, Galeano softened with age, and later life questioned the fierce attitude of his earlier writings. I suspect that Memory of Fire may have been his way of restoring a sense of humanity to the kind of bleak picture he gave us with Open Veins. As far as I'm concerned, Memory of Fire is simply a book like no other. It's very hard to describe it, really. I hope I've given some idea of what the book is about. Eduardo Galeano himself says this: I don't know to what this voice of voices belongs. Memory of Fire is not an anthology, clearly not, but I don't think it's a novel or an essay or an epic poem or testament or chronicle. Deciding robs me of no sleep. There we are.
Wow, that's amazing, David. That's brilliant. What was he? Was he a writer? Why? What was he actually in his life, Eduardo? Was he a writer? Or?
I think he began as a journalist.
Okay.
And then he became. He was also a writer of fiction, I think. Okay. But he became very dogmatic in his youth. A Marxist economist, in a sense, and he wrote about underdevelopment, which is what the Open Veins of Latin America is about. He was also influenced by Noam Chomsky, of course, and he, as I say, he mellowed with age, but some of his writing is quite moving, I find. But it's the way he's written about the past, as if he's telling you about the past, if you know what I mean, from somebody who's living in the past, if you can understand that kind of those thoughts.
That's really.
Oh, by the way, here it is. Here's the book.
Wow.
Nice and
big. It's a big.
But a good read.
It's a tome.
It is
it's
a Bible. A Bible.
It's a Bible.
I thought what was interesting was when you said this dictator had ceased to exist. Because if only it were that simple. Because when they cease to exist, they have sons, they have daughters, they have brothers who just step straight into their shoes. And I'm waiting for Trump. He's not dead. He hasn't ceased to exist, but I'm waiting for his son to step into his shoes.
I should have explained that the remarks about Bolivar were ironic, because he was all the opposite of everything. He was the liberator of his country. He was, he fought the Spaniards until he died, and
so he wasn't a dictator.
Well, not in the modern Latin American sense, no. But the writer is being ironic when he puts that, he writes that down. Because to the Spaniards, to the colonialists or the colonial powers, he was the very epitome of the devil.
It's again, whose truth is it? Whose story
truth is it? Yeah, I was thinking that.
Yeah, I love the way that you showed the way you presented it, maybe as well. But the writing was so spare, wasn't it? But also so clear. You know, that's
Yeah, I mean, I
admire that in writing.
I chose very simple examples.
Yes.
I didn't want to bore you with reading a load of, one of his texts, but
each words were chosen very, very particularly,
Yeah, the things are so wide ranging. You can go from Mexico City to Barbados to Washington, down to La Paz, and then it keeps going back and forth year by year. But you still can quite understand the narrative, even if you don't know a lot about the history. You're still drawn in and taken along with it. It's a marvelous journey.
How long did it take you to read that, Dave?
Well, this is it.
Or do you dip?
I didn't read it all at once.
You dipped?
No, it was published in 3 volumes, as I said. I originally read the first volume, then the second volume, and the third volume. There were books I borrowed from the library. I never even bought a copy.
Yeah.
And this happened to be a copy I found in a second-hand bookshop in Oxford called the Little Brown Bookshop, a left-wing bookshop that no longer exists.
Dave spends his life in bookshops.
Yes, I do. But, I mean, it was
and postcard shops.
Anyway, I was going to say, I didn't read it all at once, but I may read it all once again, because once you start reading it, you can't stop reading it, which is the great thing about a great book. You can't put it down.
I think so, yeah, that's true. But anyway.
And you can also...
You do have reading stamina. You have reading stamina that most of us don't almost have time in our lives to manage. I mean, perhaps we should be reading great tomes now that...
Well, no, I mean, it's anecdotal in the sense that, you can read a couple of entries, 1831, 1832.
That's what I do with art books.
Then put it down again and then pick it up where you left off.
Do you feel that you have now a really comprehensive knowledge? Can you retain all that sense of that massive continent and all its... So you could, you're almost like an expert now, having read all that.
Yes, that's quite true, because when I started reading it, of course, I got interested in certain aspects of Latin American history, and I read a lot about Latin America after that, and I've got tomes, loads of books, but my knowledge is if you like, prompted by reading the book. And also, I mean, I don't mean history, I mean also literature, Marquez, and, people like that, all that comes together, if you like, because he quotes, often writers in the book, or he doesn't quote them as much as he writes about the writers.
It is interesting that it's linked. It just happens to be random tonight. It's only linked in that it's how one's history of a country actually makes you who you are. I think which is what my book was about, really. And it's interesting that you chose something, but it's a very different way of loving a country to write something like that, isn't it? It's quite a journalistic way to do it, I suppose. If you mentioned he was a journalist.
Yes, it's in snippets, I guess. You get or in bite size, but all the more interesting for that alone, because it sort of sets your mind working about, well, what is he talking about here? When he describes Henry Morgan, for instance, you think, well, who was Henry Morgan?
A pirate, wasn't he?
Yes, exactly, a pirate. But he was more than a pirate. He was a little capitalist, if you like. He was a privateer, if you know what I means.
Yeah.
David, kind of same question to you actually as to Caroline. Why this book?
Because like I said before, it's like no other book. It's a book that I could say, well, you know, because when the topic came up, I said to myself, well, all the books I've got, how am I going to find a book that is, you know, the right book? And of course, I immediately thought of this. What else?
Okay.
Book. You know?
So it's kind of more, do you rather read something that's based in historical facts rather than fiction? Because obviously this is, it's not fiction, isn't it? This what you're reading. This is history. But all of it says it's not history.
Fiction. It's sometimes read like fiction, man. That's what I like about it. It's not dry history. It's not a narrative history. It's not a history book. It's more than that. It's the way he's written it.
Yeah.
It's just unique, I think.
Yeah. Great.
Is he still alive? Or is he
I love
really,
Latin
really old?
America.
No, he's passed away. I think it was in the early on in the century, 21st century.
Oh, right. Okay.
2013.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much.
I should just say that, I mean, when he wrote the book, South America or Latin America was in a terrible state. Dictatorships. There was a lot of exploitation still, neo-colonialism. So he had a lot to say about that, and he wanted people to know about that, especially his own fellow Latin Americans. He said they're always forgetting their past.
Did he have something to say about Cuba?
Oh yes, I mean Cuba included all the.
Fascinating.
How would he not say anything about Cuba, writing about Latin America?
Well, exactly. I'd love to know what. I'd like to read that section. That's what I'd like to.
I think I'm going to say why Dave chose these books, because David is obsessed with Latin America. He's he's been to Cuba, everything, even down to films, women, people. Yeah, he has that cultural obsession. And I should know.
Oh, well.
Maybe there's a topic for another show and tell. Obsessions.
Cultural obsessions.
Maybe we should do that. That
Anyway,
sounds interesting.
I just want to say thank you for allowing me to share that with you.
That's great. That's really interesting.
It was interesting, really.
I share a love of South America and Latin America. It's weird, isn't it? So thank you so much, David. Great. I'm wondering, I know Sarah Mole, you said you'd have to leave at 7 because of the football. Is there anybody else who needs to leave at 7?
He's actually not back yet, and
okay.
He's not back, so I can squeeze it in. But I haven't done a proper presentation. I've just got a book here that I'll flick through a few pages.
So maybe if we go with you next, and then does anybody else have to leave at 7, or are we okay to go till 7:30?
But don't you have to?
I think I got used to it being 7:30 now, so. But I'm happy to go with what everybody else is.
I need to leave about at least not long after 7 actually.
Okay. Right, let's do Sarah, and let's see how fast we can go. You know, I know Lisa, have you prepared something? I know you've been working hard to whittle it down.
Yeah, I have. I mean, it's kind of, there's a lot to talk about. So I wonder whether maybe I could get
installment
week.
So it's another week then. Yeah, I'd happily do it if we're all okay with that. You know, then maybe we'll just finish at 7 today, and then we'll do another session next week. Because I think Glynis, I saw Glynis this afternoon. I think she wants to. Oh no, she's done hers. Anyway, sorry, I talked to her about books though. Is that okay, Sarah Pennington? What do you think? Shall the three of us go next week, and then we can have another...
I can go next week.
And yeah, brilliant. Okay, so maybe Sarah Mole, if you want to go now.
Yeah.
And we'll.
Can we do a reading list at the end?
Oh yeah.
Okay. So this is
I'll put you on spotlight. Just hold on so we can all see what you're showing. spotlight. Okay, good.
So my book is a kid's book. This was my book, and it was Ted's book. So the book is People, and the reason I love this book, it's just because it's lovely. So it covers things beautifully. So that's the first picture in it of the world. A nice big picture of the world. Then you can, then it's Adam and Eve. So you can take that one or leave it, depending on what you think. But the facts at the beginning are very interesting, because this was written in about early 70s, and it says, we all know that there are lots of, wait a minute, can you read that? Can you see that?
Yes.
I hold it up.
Yeah.
Have a little read and look at the statistics.
Oof.
Okay.
Mm.
And there's so many more people in the world now, that this gave us a really good conversation point with me and my son when he was about 7 years old, something like that. And the idea that there's double the amount of people in the world now as that there were in the 70s is a little bit astounding. But a really good point for conversation, and a really good kind of way to start looking at the book. And it's nice because there's, it's got nice pictures, but so it starts off talking about the characteristics of different people. It talks about the different clothes people wear, and different eyes people have, the different colours people are. And I used to particularly like the different noses people had for some reason. But it's really nice. It's written in a really lovely way where, so like here it says, some people with straight hair want theirs to be wavy, and others with little curls want theirs to be straight. It has lots of cultural pictures, people around the world, and it talks about how some of us love noise, but some of us simply cannot stand it. Not everybody's idea of a good time is the same. There's games, different games around the world. Our tastes are as different as day is from night, which is, and houses that we live in. What makes some of us laugh makes some of us cry. Some of us excel at things that others could never do. Many of us like doing things with others, and others just like being by themselves. Celebrate with different feasts. We all love different pets. There's different foods to eat. And it's just really nice conversations, different temples and different religions. Some people believe in gods, others don't believe in a god at all. Different things we do for a living. And then there's a really important bit there. There's some of us are rich, although most of us are not, and many are desperately poor. Talks about the languages, has sign language in there. There's different written languages in there. And it kind of goes on this whole thing of just looking at things from lots of different perspectives. And celebrating difference, really. It says, it's very strange. Some people even hate others because they are unlike themselves. because they are different. They forget that they too would be different if only they could see themselves through other people's eyes. But imagine how dreadfully dull this world would be if everybody would look, think, eat, dress, or act the same. So it was just a really nice book, and isn't it wonderful? Each and every one of us is unlike any other. But it's really nice illustrations. So
Fantastic.
that was my nice book. That's one for little kids everywhere.
Was it from the 80s? When was that?
I think it was probably
Before
the 70s.
I think.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I missed that. I love that.
I had that book too, Sarah,
Did you?
and still
I know
do.
it was the 80s.
Very good.
It was
Been early.
1980. Yeah, it was 1980.
I must have missed that. That's true.
You had that one too, Sarah.
Yeah, and I think it really influenced me and my brother, because we both like drawing, as I'm assuming you did, and we, and this idea that of just accepting and this difference, and not to be scared of difference, but to embrace it. Yeah, we loved it all. The noses, the language, all of it was brilliant.
Yeah.
Lovely. Really nice.
And beautifully drawn as well, as you say, but just so it's really
So much better than a book that I found the other day when I was sorting books out. That was one of my children's books that I gave them for probably the same sort of reason as you were reading it. But I like the illustrations of that. That was a Boring Kindersley book that was photographs of families from different parts of the world called Children Like Us. But that was so much better because I loved the way it was illustrated and broken up into things like noses. I love that because my kids would have loved that because they love drawing and they would have just, whereas photographs, it's a bit of a cop-out really, isn't it? But it's a good book, Children Like Us, and it served the same kind of purpose, but I think not as well. That's lovely.
I'm going to go and find it later.
Sarah, I'm going to add this to my list of books to give to people with kids, isn't it? I can't believe I missed out on it.
Why I liked it. Haven't got any
Sarah, did you say you still have it? You've kept it as well.
Yeah.
So this is like I think this is the only book I actually have kept that was my own book from being a child. And I did
how could you ever get rid of that one? It's like, it's really, because it's just so lovely and it's really gentle about all these, and warm about all these differences and similarities.
There's no preaching or trying to give a moral or anything. That's why I love it. It's just so absolutely straight there without any, here it is and look at it. Aren't we all amazing?
How can you judge anyone for having having a different shaped eye, or believing in a different God? That would be daft.
Great.
It's nice as well, I think, when you grow up and you're a bit arty and you probably feel a little bit of a black sheep anyway. So maybe there was a little bit of that in why you like it, when you're creative and you kind of a bit like that anyway. I don't know. But yeah, just generally, it's lovely.
Great. Books like that are great for talking at the beginning. When you want to talk to your kids, or anybody really, but books like that are great because they instigate conversations which just happen naturally through that, that one thought, that picture about noses, and then you can have a really good laugh about noses and what's your nose like, and and so it goes on, doesn't it? It's just all connected. Fantastic.
And he knows it's my book. There's something about knowing it's your mum's book and it was your mum's book when she was little. There's something about that.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
He used to, when he was little, he used to let me read certain books as because he felt like being kind. He would let me read certain books. That's the other one. He would let me read that one as well. It's called New Blue Shoes, and I don't know if any parents know that one as well, but I won't read that one now. But that's another one I had to decide between the two. That was I was really lucky. I'd had a really good day if I was allowed to read him that as a bedtime story. It's beautiful.
That was lovely. It's funny. I love children books, and I think they're so important because they really can shape and influence who we are. And when I went through all the books, I looked at a few of the children books that I used to love reading to the kids, and I loved, and because they're pieces, I think they're works of art because the drawings are often so amazing, and the morals and the story and the message, it's unbelievable. And I think, and you pick them up for like nothing, like £3.50 when they're reduced, and I always think, oh, you deserve so much more. So yeah, and that book, I hadn't heard of it. It's definitely on my list to kind of give to people, and yeah, amazing, absolutely beautiful. Thank you so much. What a nice kind of thing to end this talk about inspirational books. And I think again, all of you, it's been such a different story for everyone, and a surprise from each one of you. It's like little treasures, isn't it? Little
different noses, you see, different noses.
Yeah, you just can't expect what's coming. So I'm happy this is continuing into next week for more surprises and treasures. So thank you so much, and fingers crossed for the football. So may the best party win. Okay. Thank you so much.
See you all next week.
See you all next week.
Bye.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Roger.
Bye-bye now.
Bye, everybody.
Take care.
Bye.